Hi, and welcome to the Nonprofit Career Network, a chapter of Great Careers BENG. And today we have with us Clayton Ferrara. Clayton Ferrara is Executive Director of Ideas for Us. Ideas for Us is a United Nations recognized NGO with work all over the world. And today, Clay is going to talk about something that he's really passionate about, which is social entrepreneurship in the nonprofit sphere. It's a very interesting conversation, and I know you'll enjoy it, and better yet, you will get a lot out of it educationally. So let's get started.
Today, I'm really excited to share a lot of information, especially around how I think nonprofits are innovating in some very special areas, from social entrepreneurship to rising to meet the needs of the 21st century, which are going to be quite unprecedented. So for myself, I am a biologist, and I have a presentation here, so I don't want to steal too much of my own thunder. But I look at innovative solutions to some of the greatest challenges facing the environment and humanity. And then once we identify those particular types of solutions, study them, create key performance indicators around them, optimize, we then share them across our network around the world, which is now including over 30 countries where we are taking action. So it's pretty exciting. Things are always changing, but that is why I love the nonprofit field. And I'm excited to share what I know with you all today.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. Now, I've made you a co-host on the presentation here, and so you should be able to show your screen.
You got it. And of course, the magic question, how long would you like me to talk, and how long should I leave for Q&A? Because I could go for about 8 hours. So you let me know.
Well, okay, I'll tell you this, we don't have 8 hours, thank you. Yep. Although it would be extremely interesting. Typically, we're anywhere from a half hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour is fine. And then whatever Q&A you're willing to tolerate after that.
Of course.
Yeah, usually it's about an hour and a quarter, because we end the meeting at 11. So, and that way we can wrap up and do a couple introductions,
like
and all
networking that within the group.
Yeah.
Itself.
Love it. All right, let's jump in because I got a lot to share. So let me click play here. All right, everybody, when you can see that, just give me a thumbs up and we will get started here. Awesome, thumbs up. Fantastic. So as was mentioned by Matt and the team, I am Clayton Lewis Ferrara. I'm a global nonprofit expert. I am the executive director of a nonprofit called Ideas for Us. But today, I'm going to zoom out my perspective and give you a little bit of an idea of not just the nonprofit that I'm CEO for, but also many of the other organizations that I've worked with through time. I am executive director and CEO of a company called Protégé Nonprofit Solutions, which is my consulting company. We predominantly focus on business formation services of launching new 501c3s, but through just demand of people in the community, I also do some consulting and helping existing organizations. So today I'm going to give a presentation, and let's get started. So I want to just touch on a little bit about myself. I am a biologist, and for me, my journey in biology started when I was very young. I have always been a conservationist. I often say I came out of the womb that way. I've always had an incredible passion for nature and for animals and for humanity in turn because of that. Environmental suffering, environmental justice are also very hand in hand with ecological justice and ecological tragedies that are occurring around the world. So once I understood the duality of that, I wanted to get involved in my community. I'm really fortunate that I have done research now on 5 different continents. I've published white papers. I'm a trained geneticist. I'm specialized in evolutionary systematics and taxonomy. And it has helped me to gain a very broad perspective of a lot of the challenges that we're facing in the world. But we can't do any of this without teams. So I've also then had to step into understanding team dynamics and really managing groups of people for excellence. Now, where would we be without the shoulders of the giants we stand on? So I always like to give a shout out to the organizations that made me who I am. And on the top row there are the 3 organizations that I grew up volunteering for. My nonprofit journey started when I was 12 years old, and I started volunteering for these organizations because you had to be 13 to start volunteering at them. And I managed to sneak my way in a year early because I was so eager and they were so excited and thrilled by that. So this is really where my nonprofit journey started. Loggerhead Marine Life Center, which is a sea turtle rehabilitation and rescue organization, Florida Oceanographic Society, which is a coastal center, and Colonian Research Institute, which is where my mentor, Peter Pritchard, built his museum for turtles, tortoises, and terrapins amassing one of the largest collections in the world on that. I was educated at one place, Rollins College in Winter Park, and I studied biology and environmental studies there. But it was very worldly. And I managed to travel all around the world and to see the impact that nonprofits are making even more so, and knew that when I emerged from college that this was something that I had already given my heart to, and when opportunities arose, jumped in. So the bottom row here is kind of the corpus of what I am below. Terraform Institute is the first nonprofit that I launched back in 2009. We set up museums, nature preserves, land trusts, and really look at the educational aspect. I design museum displays, signage for museums, educational programs and setups, science museums to art museums to natural history museums, you name it. So that is one aspect. We mentioned Ideas for Us. Don't worry, we're going to hear more about them in a moment. I am a United Nations delegate, and since 2012, Ideas for Us has been a UN-accredited NGO. So I work for many different UN groups and bodies organizing how global nonprofits collaborate on moving the needle on major world issues. I am also a delegate and fellow for Pope Francis's Vatican Youth Assembly. This is something I joined way back when I was under 30. I'm 34 now. This was a global youth group that was coming together around sustainability, environmental and humanitarian work, and really extraordinary groups of people and connections through there, moving the needle around the world. And of course, Protege Nonprofit Solutions, which is what I'm also representing today, my consulting and nonprofit business formation company. So we all know nonprofits are a sticky situation. They are quite challenging. Very often people come to me and they say, well, what do you think is more difficult, a for-profit company or a nonprofit? And I always say to them, man, I am so lucky that I had nonprofit experience before I started my for-profit company, because the for-profit world is so much simpler compared to the nonprofit world. It is pretty incredible. Nonprofits, as we'll learn today, the more they try to break the formula of business, the more difficult it is for them to gain a financial foothold. All of us live in the society that we do, regardless of our culture. We are most likely used to the transactional aspect of money. You want something, you pay for it. When you ask someone to merely donate for nothing in return, you have to be so clear and specialized in communicating the reason of why someone in their right mind would want to do that, that it stagnates a lot of organizations. So innovating in these ways is really key. And I think that the journey that people go on in nonprofits can be much less tumultuous. But after all, a calm sea makes for bad sailors. And I really believe that it is in the nonprofit sector that we have some of the greatest entrepreneurial wisdom, perspective, game-changing innovations and ideas. And this is emerging as a new passion of mine in finding those rock stars in the nonprofit world and connecting them with the for-profit world, especially for innovation and partnerships, which are so key in many aspects. So I wanted to start off today with a quote that's near and dear to my heart, and I think it's kind of the thesis statement of this presentation. This is by Dr. Carl Jung, and you'll notice that the word fool and master are capitalized in this particular quote. That's because they are referring to the archetypes here. And if you're not willing to be the fool, you will never become a master. And that goes to show that in the nonprofit world, there's no magical guide in a secret library somewhere that tells us how to do this work. It is very much an aspect of trial by error, learning by doing, kind of the classic entrepreneurial hustle, if you will, of creating and acting on opportunities with very little resources. So I always put this on here because I think it's so key that we all remember that it's okay to make mistakes. And whatever preconceived notion you, your board members, your team, staff, interns, whoever it may be, whatever nonprofit experience they may have, it is important to keep innovating and keep making mistakes, because that is the only way to become a master in what you do. And it's quite worth it, because there is no shortage of problems facing our planet today, from climate change to homelessness to, the world and global conflicts we're facing. I just had a meeting with a group of people in Ethiopia, Prince Hermes, who's the one of the princes of the royal family in Ethiopia, and they are going through a tremendous, what should be called a genocide right now in what they're dealing with. Of course, we see SOS Cuba and SOS Colombia and Venezuela and many of these other things right now. Haiti, of course, is in tumultuous turmoil. So there is no shortage of causes out there. And I really believe that the nonprofit world can diversify as much as the private sector has. And instead of competition, come together in partnership. So we're going to explore also what a lot of those things look like from an entrepreneurial sense as well. Now, I don't need to go too much into this because I think I'm dealing with a lot of nonprofit pros here. But when it comes down to looking at a 501c3, you always hear about the benefits. You get discounts on things because people want to help you in the community. You're able to reinvest that profit that you're not spending into programs, of course. State and federal corporate income tax is exempt. Local and state sales tax is exempt. Of course, we all know you got to pay payroll tax when you have staff. I've seen a lot of nonprofit executives get caught by this. You can't just write people checks. You got to still pay the man. And of course, that's money going towards Social Security, Medicaid, workers' comp, and unemployment. I'm here in Florida. So as far as labor laws go, if you have more than 4 employees, you have to have unemployment insurance. That's a very important piece of the puzzle, and workers' comp. But you get a lot of benefits for being a nonprofit. Of course, we know freedom from tax obligations. You've got a donor's allowance for tax-deductible contributions, so you can work in partnership with philanthropies and corporate America and private donors, community foundations, and so on. You get a little bit of protection from personal liability, though I always say that you should definitely have D&O, directors and officers, insurance as well as an organization. Discounts, as I remembered, which is, as I mentioned, which is always an important thing for nonprofits. But don't get it twisted, because tax exemption and tax status is not a business model. And I see too many fantastic nonprofits stagnate in the work that they're doing because they believe themselves to be professional beggars as their only means of bringing in funding. And I look to some of the most extraordinary nonprofits I've ever come in contact with. I think that people who know me, is no secret that I'm a big fan of my alma mater, where I was educated, Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. They are a 501c3 nonprofit. And I promise you, as a private college, they got a lot of my money. And it was certainly a transactional experience, where I paid them for an extraordinary education, and they certainly delivered. And that spirit of not breaking the entrepreneurial, financial, capitalistic model of transaction is a key to why they have now been around for over 125 years, because they have a business model that is other than just philanthropy. So where does this come into play? Well, this is a really interesting chart. It's a little dated in the fact that it was first put together in 1997. I don't want you to get too lost in the details here, but it is important to understand that what we want to do in good nonprofits is build an organization that is more like an organism. And I make no apologies about all of my biology analogies that I unleash in my nonprofit work. But if you have an adaptive, dynamic organism, you've got less of a chance of going extinct, which is something that we don't want to happen as our nonprofits. So you're going to change and go through this kind of evolution as time goes on. So you've got these various stages that I'm showing here, and then you've got the duration and these key questions. Let's just kind of focus in on that particular 3-column aspect here. You're going to come up with the organization, think to yourself, is this dream feasible? There's a startup and incubation phase, an adolescent and growing phase, a maturing and sustainability phase that an organization takes on. And hey, just because you reach maturity and sustainability doesn't always mean that you're not going to come into a time of stagnation. I think all of us can agree that we have either been part of or hopefully not at the helm of organizations that have been accused of stagnating, but it can happen. And this is something that you commonly hear, especially from people entering the sector, that maybe they're perplexed by someone who's been doing it the same way every year, 25, 30 years. That's how it is. And they're resistant to change. Organizations like that are not facing the right side of the deck, I think. They've got to, of course, adapt, modernize, those types of things. And then it may come time for decline and shutdown. Now, I've come in contact with some nonprofit rock stars where decline and shutdown is actually part of the game, where they create an organization that has a very specific pathway and goal in the community. And when it's over, they declare mission accomplished and then start a new organization. And it is a very unique approach to doing these types of things. But I bring this up because there is a life cycle to this. And for nonprofits to have a dynamic revenue model, to understand that there is a level of complexity that is increasing through time. And just because you set up a nonprofit and it's in its first 6 months, doesn't mean that you need to start calling up the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for funding. There are a lot of things that happen between the birth of the organization and its maturity level, where it has an incredible, maybe multiple decades long track record of success, where someone will be willing to write you that $850,000 check or higher. So important things to think about for anyone who is trying to pinpoint where they are in this particular timeline as an organization. But let's talk about the dough. One thing to be very cognizant of is that we exist in these civic circles that are out there in the world. And the better nonprofit organizations understand this, the better they can create an entrepreneurial business model that implements into their philanthropic structures. So we all know that we've got these interesting circles of civics, often referred to as the private sector, the public sector. But hey, now, who would have thought there is a third one that most people never talk about, and that is where philanthropy lives. And we'll see that in just a minute. But I promise, at the bullseye, in the Venn diagram of these 3 civic sectors, is resources that make nonprofits so lucrative when executed properly. So I'll just give some quick examples, though I think that a little bit of this is maybe old hat to our audience. But when we look at the public sphere, let's take a look at my neighborhood, neck of the woods here in Central Florida. We've got things like the county, the state, and then these kinds of quasi public sector things like Orange County Public Schools, right, which is our public school system. Here it happens to be the 10th largest public school system in the country. So hundreds of thousands, I think almost 300,000 kids part of the particular school system. So very, very interesting aspects there. And I cannot see the chat so while I'm presenting. So if there are any questions, please interrupt me. I am an academic, so I do love the sound of my own voice. So if you would like to ask a question, please feel free to interrupt at any time. So in creating or in looking at these different partners in the community, in the public sphere, we have kind of the usual run of players, I believe, that people are very familiar with. Then, of course, you've got the private sector, which I think is probably the most famous. There's the terrifying study where if you ask kids to identify leaves around their house and tell you what kind of tree they are, that you're lucky if you get one kid to get one right, but you show them logos from companies and they all know what they are, right? Well, it just goes to show that these are some of the most famous, in your face, through advertising or otherwise, entities in our community. But let's not forget, even though the examples that I've put here are large companies, they've got the advertising budgets behind them, you have to know that 80% of our American economy is small businesses, which is defined as companies of 300 people or below. So that's a tremendous amount of our economy. So the private sector, of course, is made up of these players that have their own problems, resources, competition, etc. And I think it's very familiar to a lot of us. But of course, there's this other sector that's kind of strange and a catch-all, and that's the independent sector. And this is the sector that nonprofits live, but it's also where you have things like educational institutions, hospitals, companies that are kind of seemingly almost mutants between for-profit and nonprofit, like Florida Blue, which is an insurance company, but is a 501c3. You have big overarching entities doing work in the communities like United Way, or colleges with the largest endowments in the world like Harvard University or American Red Cross, as far as gigantic nonprofits go that have war chests of billions of dollars at hand. But you also have religions, and you have religions that are formed and have tax ID numbers and operate throughout the community, doing both philanthropy, but also gathering people who are religious to practice their various faiths. And that is where the independent sector lives. And it is the role of the independent sector to solve problems and innovate in ways that the public and the private sector cannot. The more you can identify problems that the public sector has and the private sector has, and serve as the independent sector to solve them, there is a value there. So the amount of money an organization has, or even the amount of money a person has, for instance, has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with hard work. It has to do with value creation. So the more value that you create, the richer you will be, the richer your organization will be, the more opportunities you will have. Value is the name of the game in our economy, in our capitalistic economy as well. So don't get it twisted, and remember that aspect as you're imagining, what value does my nonprofit play in the community? How can I be valuable to solve the problems of companies and of the public sector of government? Because if you can do that, now you're really taken off in a good direction. Well, why is this so important? Well, it's unfortunate because nonprofits are pretty broke. This is a 2019 graph from the National Council of Nonprofits. Very great in the aspect that it kind of consolidates so much data from across the country. So being from 2019, this is looking at 2018 numbers. But let's take a look at the big chunk of the pie here. 55% of nonprofits out there are only filing a 990N or no expenses reported. So we know that that means that they're pulling in less than $60K a year, and that's 55% of nonprofits. There is 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States. Let me say that again, 1.5 million nonprofits in the USA. 55% of them are pulling in less than 60K a year, or 60K or below. So that's an important thing to realize. And when you see the amount of money that the larger organizations are bringing in, it's quite truncated. 2%, greater than 10 million. 10 million is not much to sneeze at in the private sector, right? That's, a mid-sized company. So the nonprofit sector is stunted. And I believe that it's stunted because of the lack of entrepreneurial innovation and the unfortunate aspect that too many organizations are competition focused. And as you'll see, some of the things that have allowed us to break into the 1 million and up echelon is our partnerships in building dynamic organizations that are partnership rich, mutualism based, sharply entrepreneurial, and very, very important in those different kinds of aspects. So kind of a sobering reality check to see where nonprofits are in the world of our country, and how there's just so much need for innovation in these aspects. The fact that 20% is just breaking 100K or almost breaking 100K is pretty wild. And then to see that drop of making over 100K, only 8% from 20%, something's going on there. So there's a scaling issue as well, that they may be regionally successful in that neighborhood, that school system, that community, but how do you crank it up a notch and become a more dynamic organization with much deeper pockets to enable impact? Well, the nice thing is that resources are everywhere in the biosphere. And when I mention organizations being more like organisms, right, you can see the analogy here. So you've got strategic investments from the team, of course, things that get most small nonprofits off the ground, grants and foundations, events, of course, these are old hat for organizations. Fee-for-service programs, that's where a lot of innovation can happen. Membership and merchandise and businesses. And merchandise, this doesn't necessarily mean the PBS tote bag model, right? This can mean an entirely dynamic arm of the organization competing right up against the private sector and beating the private sector because you don't pay taxes. So if you're investing that money properly in further bolstering the income that you're bringing in, that's far more money for your projects and programs. So don't forget, a dynamic nonprofit that is able to compete with the for-profit world will always win because you have more cash on hand and more revenue strategies than they do if you take proper advantage of those. So where does the money come from? Well, I guess this is probably no surprise for us as well. Again, these are 2018 numbers coming from 2017. All my graphs and things like that have citations on the bottom of them. So please feel free to check them out and do your own due diligence. But when we're looking at numbers here, remember these numbers are in billions with the B, and individuals donating $286.7 billion. And philanthropy was up in 2020 because of the unprecedented need. People gave more money in 2020 than they did in 2019. Companies gave more money in 2020 than they did in 2019. So these numbers are only increasing. But look, I work with a lot of corporations, Fortune 100 companies, Fortune 500 companies. We deal with many foundations, some of the greatest foundations out there, small community foundations as well. But individuals, by far, when you look at the full nonprofit puzzle, is where the majority of contributions come from. And we see that every single day when someone starts a GoFundMe about something, that's kind of unorganized philanthropy. But it's individuals that rise up and donate to these types of causes because that's where the needle moves on many of these aspects. Well, where does the money go? Well, it's no surprise that religion has eaten the biggest piece of the pie. These are 2016, or these are 2017 numbers with 2016 shown on the side there. And I'll direct your attention to some interesting things, but of course we see education and human services. Also keep in mind these numbers are in billions with a B, right? So $127 billion flowing into religious organizations. Now, of course, they're doing work. They're not just buying frankincense and myrrh with this money. They are putting it into all kinds of things like homelessness relief, food pantries, you name it. That is definitely an important aspect that many religious organizations are bringing to the table. Education, of course, human services, foundations, health, public society benefit, international affairs. Interesting thing, seeing that it has gone down the amount of money going to international affairs in 2016. So there's a lot of inquiry onto that may have been tied to our former presidential administration and turning away of philanthropy going to international resources. But that is definitely what the data shows, with a decrease of 4%, 4.4% between 2016 and 2017. Arts, culture, and humanities, 20 billion, nothing to sneeze at, rising a little bit in the 2017 numbers. But dun, 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 at the very bottom of the pile is where my work is in environmental and animal, getting the least money possible, which has perplexed me since I was 12. As to how that could be when we all breathe the same air and drink the same water and appreciate the same wild places and depend on the same food. But for whatever reason, the environmental world has been stricken with a very bad PR campaign and certainly needs all the help it can get in gaining the attention of others. So what do you do when your sector that you're in is literally at the bottom of the pile of concerns? Every single chart, every single study, with the least amount of philanthropic resources flowing in those directions? Well, I'm happy to say you innovate and you invent and you struggle and fail and try again and struggle and fail and try again. And that has been the approach we've taken as an organization since the very beginning. So I'm going to go into a little bit of a story time here to give some real world examples of how we have used this kind of entrepreneurial perspective to build who we are and what we do as an organization, which I think is very important. We have created a program called Fleet Farming. That ideas for us hypothesized when we came down to solving a multitude of environmental problems in the community, decentralizing agriculture, creating carbon neutral ways of transit between farms, reconnecting people to the earth, growing food in food deserts, all of these types of things like that. And it began as a wonderful grassroots program, but soon grew into something we didn't expect because we began transforming homes and lawns all around our community to look like this and become food oases. We especially targeted places that were federally recognized food deserts and people didn't have access to produce. And when we were growing all of this produce, we said, well, we need to be able to sell it. And we have different customers and audience members. So let's sell the bulk of it for very, very low reduced rate, practically free, or let's even enroll in SNAP and EBT programs where at farmers markets that we will create in communities that don't have them, fueled by the farms that we create in the area surrounding where the farmers market will be, and create a hyper-localized urban agricultural hub that we can then feed people, especially during COVID, for virtually free or for 3x benefits through SNAP and EBT in these particular communities. We then said, okay, well, there's also the other side of the spectrum. So let's grow these beautiful heirloom vegetables and sell them to high-end clients like the Ritz-Carlton and the St. Regis Hotel. And the list goes on and on and on. Disney and high-end restaurants and things like that in the community where they can only get these particular things from us. So that was a big bang moment back in 2014 when we came up with this project. Ideas for Us has been around since 2008. We started in a dorm room as a group of 5 of us sitting around looking at one another, wanting to change the world. And we've now built the organization to do work in 30 different countries around the world. And we are the only United Nations accredited nonprofit between Tampa and Daytona in Central Florida. So we're very proud of that as a group of millennials, and also that we attained United Nations accreditation without a single paid staff member. For the first 5.5 years of this organization's existence, we were 100% volunteer, and we're able to do some really extraordinary things with that youth energy and fire in our bellies that still burns to this day. So the next aspect is, well, when you're selling produce, what else is there? And we saw a huge need to then adapt this program to bringing this experience to others outside of our service range. So we started catering to hospitals. We started catering to nursing homes, universities, restaurants, hotels. This is a nursing home with American Disabilities Act approved substrate with cedar raised bed gardens that we not only maintain on a maintenance plan, but we also have at wheelchair height for residents to be able to utilize, which is extremely important. And of course, the soil, dirt covering is safe there to not get stuck in walkers or in wheelchairs or whatnot. So again, inclusive, equitable spaces that are important for people to have access to. And what this has done is kind of open the door for who funds us. All of these companies here give money to Ideas for Us because we help them directly achieve their goals. So these companies have a multitude of goals, both internationally and also locally, and we help them to achieve those. These can be everything from employee experiences, bringing groups out to essentially take part in local philanthropic action, all the way to working with their leadership teams and helping them to find avenues for sustainability due to our expertise in the subject, and to be able to leverage a lot of the different things that they're doing as equitable companies, or at least companies that are trying to do that and align their value and brand in those particular ways. So again, very important that once you start thinking this way of how can I solve problems for these different entities, it opens the door as far as philanthropy goes. And that's not only very lucrative, but wonderful impact. These companies are helping us drill wells in and provide fresh water for hundreds of school children in Uganda. They are helping us to build an entire network of gardens where every kid can touch soil in their education in Central Florida. They're helping us reforest through tens of thousands of fruit trees across areas that have been denuded due to war or genocide or deforestation, illegal logging, you name it. So it is not just the greenwashing pomp and circumstance that I think so many of us are skeptical of, but we measure through metrics and key performance indicator matrices that I've created all of the impact to show these companies on a silver platter who we are and what we do. So there is no issues with them telling the story to their audiences. And we also are very media focused in the fact that we shoot in 1080p and 4K. And we take multitudes of amazing pictures, multitudes of fantastic videos, and provide all of those for our clients on a silver platter for their work helping us. Well, of course, this goes into the social enterprise spectrum. There's something that's, of course, purely philanthropic and purely commercial. And of course, social enterprise bullseyes directly in the middle. I think that that is a very important thing to keep in mind, and something that nonprofits can certainly learn from. Hospitals use this model, colleges use this model, most aspects of education, classes, coursework, continuing education uses this model, and it is very important for people to be aware of and to leverage and utilize. Well, one thing I'd also like to just kind of leave on as we come to the close of this presentation to then open it up to some questions is that your board plays an important role in this. And you want your board to be involved in the ideation of things. And this is a really interesting chart of how the board transforms over time. So you can see this kind of extreme end of board as staff. And if you bring your eyes down to the bottom, two boxes there in each column, you will essentially see what the board is doing at each one of those stages. So in the beginning, your board's basically the staff. They're doing the work of the organization, and the primary output that they have is labor. Then you're going to move on to the board as managers. Their primary aspect is supervising that work, and their output is going to be to coordinate. Then you've got the board as governors, and they're directing the work of the organization, and their primary output is direction. And then you've got the board as advisors, where they're just reviewing the work of the organization, and they're providing counsel. And then you reach the level where your board is kind of just figureheads. Leonardo DiCaprio, for instance, is a board member of World Wildlife Federation. I promise he is not licking stamps and stuffing envelopes for mail campaigns to raise money. He is showing up at their gala or at the UN and endorsing the work that they're doing so that others will then provide them with support as well. And of course, that's the level that we want to work to have our boards escalate in that particular trajectory. So very, very important to think about and to know that as your organization grows and changes, the role that your board will play in helping to ideate around this will also transform and eventually reach the point where they're just saying, hey, do this. It's awesome. We had great results from it. You do it too. And people in those communities can have a very, very big impact in that way. So just some key takeaways when it comes to talking to your board about this type of innovation, which I think is important, especially for my fellow executive directors on here. Of course, we are often only as good as our board's support can enable us to be. And that is important to be aware of. But when it comes to boards, right, you've got to reduce your size so no one can hide in the shadows. You want to come down from boards that are in the high 20s. I've been invited to be on boards of organizations where they had as many as 35 board members. And I'll tell you, that is as terrible as it sounds. And you then, of course, want to balance being a small organization with a small board and not burning people out, because there is that temptation to grow, because there is the myth that more board members equal more money. And having a lifespan for board members also helps. It keeps you tapped into not exhausting the circles of influence that people have in the community. I always say I want to manage my board members like I manage a stock portfolio, make sure that they are all performing at tip-top ability and swap them out when they're not. And that is an important thing to think about. And of course, I always recommend some legacy books. There's a great book from a number of years ago called the Nonprofit Board Answer Book. This book has now been in multitudes of different editions. I think there's, I have like Nonprofit Board Answer Book 1, 2, and 3 that they've come out with now. But I always like to kind of recommend little areas that people can find more answers, more solutions, more ways to think about this and get your organization's board on board with embracing these type of entrepreneurial ventures. So let me just switch to this one. I'll skip that slide that I had there for Q&A. I'll kind of bring that up about how to optimize and look for particular board members that are beneficial to entrepreneurial related things. But I just want to say thank you. I hope I have helped you to see outside of the veil that you may have had over your perspective on dynamic nonprofit entrepreneurship. I think that it is very important for more organizations to embrace this. After all, as nonprofit leaders, you are used to so many more regulation, rules, complexity, and so on that for-profit companies don't have to deal with. And that's a special superpower. You want to use that. We're all professional jugglers in the nonprofit world. So, let's get out there and juggle. So thank you very much. This has been a real pleasure. I'm excited for the Q&A portion for the rest of this. And anyone who wants to reach out to me, there is my email. And you can do so there. You can also find me on LinkedIn and Facebook. Just type in my name. And I am here to help and to communicate with many partners all about these types of things. So thank you very much. And I will turn it back to you, Matt.
Well, thank you so much, Clayton. And actually, you at the end there answered my first question, which is how people get a hold of you. We always want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to contact our great presenters like yourself. And this, by the way, was very helpful. I got a lot out of it. I it's very consistent with a lot of the things that a lot of us talk about, which is huge. One of the things, honestly, you talked about, it was kind of hit my head. It's like, oh yeah, let's put corporate logos on turtles. Innovative ways of getting folks involved. But no, of course, that's not what we're talking about here. But there really are a lot of innovations that can occur in the nonprofit space. So tell me, and not to get too geeky about things here, but we have a couple of accountants on the call, and I think other people who might know about this. So when we get into other entrepreneurial things, somebody will always bring up UBIT, right? Unrelated business income tax for ventures that aren't either related to mission or they're not volunteer connected. I think there are 3 UBIT standards: mission, volunteers, and I have actually episodic. So how do you address that when people ask you that question?
Yeah, best way to address it is know the law. Know the law, know what the rules are, and don't be afraid of it. I don't know why people are afraid of paying taxes. It means you're making money.
Yep.
So, and there's nothing wrong with that. Pay as many taxes as you have to if you're making revenue. Who cares? If you were a for-profit company, you'd be paying plenty of taxes. So I think it comes from the fact that, and here's a plug for all you accountants out there, people need great CPAs and accountants helping with their nonprofit organizations. That is extraordinarily important. I promise you can accomplish anything with a good lawyer and a good banker. And, that is very, very important to know. So if we have things that we're selling that we need to pay sales tax on for purchasing, we do it. And that's how you get around it.
Yeah. Or not. I mean, actually, don't get around it, actually do it and own it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'd like to chime in and agree with that because I would rather pay, let's say it's 5 or 10%. I would rather have 80% of something than 100% of nothing. So if you've got to fill out an extra form for UBIT, do it because then you've got this is also about having alternative sources of revenue, not just grants and donations, but looking at how you can have alternative sources of revenue. And so in Clayton, as long as I have the floor right now, I just like to say every single thing you said, I was like, yes, 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 because I've been saying this for so long, even to your point of when I was with a literacy council and in a networking meeting, I said, this is like, now I'll date myself a little bit, 30 years ago, we should all be putting ourselves out of business, because the reason, if I'm trying to teach adults to read, that shouldn't even happen. And so I love that. You literally hit every single point that I've always believed in my heart. So I want to thank you for that. And then I just want to share this resource. This is, there we go. I have to put it there.
I was going to say either that book cover is full of profanity and it's blurred out, but
it's because I have to make it the spotlight, not me. This is nonprofit sustainability, and I'll drop that information in the chat. There's a really cool for you trying to figure out what's actually making you money. It's the double bottom line, and they have this really cool chart. It's a matrix where you I'm not going to do it. Maybe if I take but anyway, there's, the heart, what meets our mission and that we're going to still do regardless. What meets our mission, but also makes us money. What doesn't meet our mission or make us money, and you just stop that. And I will drop these in the chat because that helps you behave more like an entrepreneur. If a business weren't making money, it would stop doing whatever or improve the process so you can make money. So
now, and that's the thing. The nonprofit world can make its mission, can do its mission, but then fund it in other ways, so that every mission source doesn't have to be a revenue base, but it can bring in other funds to make that happen.
Let me give a quick example here. Great organization called SELF. SELF, all caps, Solar Energy Loan Fund. It is a nonprofit that loans money and makes money off of the interest that people pay on their loan. 501c3, completely legal, $15 million revenue last year.
Yeah. Now, that's the model that CDFIs take, right? Community Development Financial Institutions, and which were started by nuns. I don't know if people know right? Nuns started the CDFI concept where they wanted to invest in their community instead of put their retirement into a big bank or a portfolio. And with that, they actually became saviors of that community to develop businesses, to give home loans and things that way. And the whole CDFI concept actually turns out that people default less with them than they do with big organizations, big banks and the rest, because they're more personal and on the ground with folks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It just goes to the aspect that, you as an organization want to think about, are there things I could be doing that will serve my audience or my donors that have a value to them? And start there, right? You don't want to suddenly become a clothing or apparel company out of nowhere, right? If you're trying to do something completely unrelated, start by looking at what is the low-hanging fruit that directly aligns with your mission, because that strengthens your brand.
Well, there's an interesting continuum if you take a macro view of this in the relationship between nonprofits, government, and the for-profit sector. Nonprofits is where a lot of innovation starts. Take higher education, right? Higher education was and still is, to a large extent, a nonprofit enterprise. However, in the 1850s, higher education democratized by the government getting involved in it. And then along the way, private companies got into education and higher education. So there are a lot of sectors like that in healthcare. Even rockets actually go that way, from Goddard and universities into government and now into private space work. But then it's also a refuge. So that continuum works the other direction, where something might have been a private enterprise like transportation, and then public transit, and then it became a government entity because it wasn't profitable to make it a private thing, but it became a government entity. And then some aspects of that have even become nonprofit. Journalism's another great view of this. Kind of, it had to skip the government sector in our economy, but there are a lot of nonprofit journalism organizations. So so the innovation may not be at one end of that scale, let's do something new. It might be actually the other end where you're saving something that is still valuable.
Absolutely. And this is why I kind of crescendoed with, some tips on how to poke your board, right? Because after all, for all of the executive directors out there, our job is to make decisions through the consensus and blessing of the board, especially when they're controversial. Because the last thing you want is for your head to wind up on the chopping block. You rather want to be the cat herder of consensus, right? So that if something goes haywire, it's the whole board's fault. And that protects you a little bit more in your role. But it also is the missing ingredient so often in spawning real innovation. Listen, if someone has time to be on your board and to be really active as a volunteer, they probably have money, and it came from somewhere. So they are either an entrepreneur themselves or they're an executive in a company. They have the time and the resources to give. So use that and say, who are you with your companies? Where did your entrepreneurial skill come from? Challenge them, right? Half of my time is spent challenging my board. The other half of the time is bothering them about things. So it is quite important to keep that in mind. This is your team. They're on your side, and they should be helping to innovate.
Real politic lessons from Clayton.
And Clayton, I have to say, probably the thing that impressed me the most about your presentation was that board slide when you were talking about that, because I really find that you need to set expectations for board members very clearly and very concisely, because you will get those people that just quote unquote hide in the shadows, or those that really don't provide you with the resources that you thought they were going to provide you with. So I just am in the process of joining a small board, and I'm excited about their mission, but they have not made very clear expectations on me as a board member. So I'm going to take that challenge that you just shared today back to them and say, look, if you want me to be an active board member, I really need to understand what you want from me.
Now, Colleen added, I'm sorry, Clayton, go ahead and respond to that, please.
I mean, I'm glad. That's great. That's another thing that we can do too. Once you're in the field of nonprofits for a while, don't become jaded, become wise, and share this information with others, and share it with your fellow board members, and bring them charts like this and show them examples from other organizations. It's so important. It's important we keep an open mind as well. Though I am a teacher and a professor and speak all over the world on things and blah, 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 I am a student first, period. That is my role. Every single room I walk into, I'm hoping to learn something, and being humble and surrendering myself to that aspect. That's why I am and where I am and who I am. So we've got to remember we're students too. That's why I put that Jungian slide in there about the fact that in order to be the master, you have to be the fool. And what is the fool? The fool is often depicted with their eyes to the horizon, about to fall into a pit because they're not watching what's in front of them, because they're idealistic. So the organizations need the idealistic leaders that then make so many mistakes that they can remain idealistic and then not fall in the pit anymore. And that's how you become the master. So we've got to remember, be honest with yourself. Where are you in that continuum? And how can you be better? How can you make the right kinds of mistakes? If you're a nonprofit executive, but you've never taken part in an entrepreneurial pursuit of launching something brand new and building a customer base, and hustling and marketing and optimizing and looking at metrics and KPIs. Try it out. What have you got to lose? You fail? Fine. Fail 100 times and you win once. I think that there's a tremendous fear out there of that. And especially in our fields where we want to, kind of flex on our abilities and our knowledge set. But we need less of that in the nonprofit world. We got to collaborate and we've got to always be humble and keep learning.
Well, and then you bring up an interesting point there, because I think a lot of board members are sometimes less tolerant of entrepreneurism than you would hope.
Mm-hmm.
Colleen here shows that data shows that entrepreneurs give it a higher rate in other groups, and I can certainly say that's the case, because my experience with people who work in big companies who have paycheck jobs versus somebody who might earn less who's an entrepreneur, the entrepreneur always gives more. But you don't find necessarily that same entrepreneurial spirit on a board. There's a lot of safety there going on. How do you work with that?
You bring the artillery of experience and stories from other organizations that have used this to success, right? That's number one, right? You want to paint the dream and the vision to the naysayers and bring data to the table. Here's an organization, here's their we can pull 990s of anybody. Here's a 990 of this organization that has launched this high profile campaign. Here's how much money they made the year before. Here's how much money they made the year after. It distinctly says the revenue streams, and you can show, look at this increase that they've had, or look at this impact that they've had, or here's what they were able to do, or they attracted this new donor or fundraiser that way, right? Data is hard to argue with, right? But you've got to also present it in a way where you're selling essentially to your group. If you believe in something strongly enough that, hey, we're going to be able to get more homeless people off the street and into housing, or we're going to be able to drill more wells in South Sudan that's having a genocide. It is worth spending 30 minutes to get your pitch down in front of your board to convince them to do something, right? So we've got to be willing to go the extra mile, with this kind of thing for sure. So I think that, naysayers, they may be naysayers with a good reason. Maybe they have been part of an organization before that they saw a decision like this made and it ended terribly. And the organization maybe lost face in the community, or had their funding decrease, or got steamrolled by, a disagreeing donor that pulled funding. Who knows? Always ask what their hesitation is. If someone's a big pain in the ass, there's usually a reason why.
Well, as they say in sales, people buy emotionally and justify logically.
Yep.
And you're right on spot with that. You have to, they're there because of the vision of the mission, and appealing to that is a really important. So that's great. Colleen, she's been great. Colleen, you could say these things too. No, she says continuing board education is critical to keep them updated on trends and that'll impact your nonprofit. And I 100% agree. And I, of course, direct people to Nonprofit.Courses for that. But also creating a board matrix that includes what you need to drive your nonprofit business, that includes entrepreneurs as well as subject matter experts. Yeah. How about the variety of people on a board, Clayton? What are your, obviously, is this so obvious that you need to do, or how's that work?
No. In fact, most people don't have the right people on their board. Most people have people just like them on their board, or you have a bunch of board members that are exactly the same, usually passionate, well-meaning people, but maybe not with the right diverse skill sets. Yeah. And, though I may kind of poo-poo on people who are sticks in the mud and pains in the butt, they're actually sometimes your MVPs. So you want to be careful about that too. So great people to have on nonprofit boards: CPAs, executive directors of other organizations or past executive directors of organizations, nonprofit lawyers, people who understand the entrepreneurial hustle and are successful, people who are retired and have time to be able to give, people who are at the prime of their careers and struggle to find the time, but somehow do, right? All of those are so valuable to have to the table. You're collecting a tribe group of people where you have to pick the right individuals on the roster to solicit and to bring on. And that's important. But let me give you all a pro tip, and it is called the advisory board. My number one rule in business is don't work with crazy people. And so you want to make sure that you are not setting yourself up for a stage 5 disaster by suddenly flooding your board with new talent. So the great buffer is to put them on the advisory board and see how they do. Remember, advisory board is non-voting. It doesn't have the responsibilities of governance legally that nonprofit board members do. They're not fiscally liable. They're not legally liable unless they take part in criminal, acts, but they're still just glorified volunteers on the advisory board. So I always put people on the advisory board for at least a year and see how they do. Are they giving? Are they willing to participate? Do they really bring it? And if not, fine, they stay on the advisory board. Great. Or maybe we kick them off. But, only then does someone have a shot of getting on our board, because then they're voting. They can put my head on the chopping block as executive director, right? So we want to guard this so that only the most competent, capable, mission-first people come to the board, because that is really the key. The mission must be so centrally important to them that often the people in the room are so different, from such different backgrounds and so diverse, but the commonality is the mission. And to me, that's always been a winning design.
No, and that's a really good idea for a lot of reasons. You're right on spot with that. With not only, but and it's interesting looking at it from the nonprofit point of view, which you did, which is great. You need to do this, but also from their point of view, they may not be ready for that commitment. They want to test out the organization to find out more about you before they jump in and be a board member, which can be pretty daunting for a lot of people.
For sure.
Especially if they know the responsibilities of a board, which in fact, it's the board members who say yes right away, who have no prep, are the ones you probably don't want.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Unless someone, is kind of like, oh, maybe, right. They may not have the sense of what they're getting themselves into. I've just sworn off being on boards right now. So I'm happy to be on advisory boards and serve in that capacity, which I'll have to say has also been lessened significantly since I've been consulting, because that now takes the place of a lot of the value that I've been bringing to the table for advisory board work for a lot of new organizations that are coming into my life. But it's so important. And even if you, and I know that this sounds crazy, but even if you are a nonprofit executive and you're giving your life to this organization, try to still find time to give and donate to other organizations just to see how the other side is living and operating, right? Because you're essentially there to glean good ideas.
Yeah.
And there's nothing better than volunteering and being part of organizations that are richer, bigger, faster, stronger than you are. That is the only way to learn and level yourself up.
Excellent point. Now, Lynn, you said about spikes. What's a spike?
All right. So a couple of years ago, our board, we had somebody do a team analysis. And, you've got your DISC people, right? And then there are people that don't glom together like in the same areas, and they're outliers. So like Malcolm Gladwell talks about outliers, right? Those are the people that are spikes. So I guess I was known as the spike. And I still may consider myself, but I do have my frustrations. There's things that I want to do or want to happen, and they can't always happen because we don't have enough volunteers or the money, or like there's always something. There's an obstacle in the way. So it's frustrating having obstacles.
Yeah. And
wanting to be the spike and, make things happen. So I believe, it takes money to make money. And we have a little bit of money, but we don't have a lot. So we have to use it it cautiously.
So let me jump into, so in addition to advisory boards, if you're still in the transitional stage between 100% board volunteers and maybe you have some staff, but you don't have enough staff to run all of the aspects of operations, what I have seen and what I have done in some of my nonprofits that I've been with is create committees, which may have, if it's a staff function like operations, it might be a staff committee and then their board committees. So example, if it's fundraising or fund development or whatever, have a board member on that, but then fill it with volunteers. And then the board member gets to know these people and can recommend them for board service if they're appropriate. Because the biggest problem I had in a small rural community was, well, we don't know this person. Why would we want them on the board? Well, because they've got board experience, et cetera, but it was the unknown. And so putting people on committees as well as advisory boards, however you want to put it, that is a great idea to funnel people into your board that already know the organization. So the orientation process is a lot quicker and have a passion for the mission. You can see whether they do or not by their committee work.
So, Lynn, you have a question here, but I got to ask you, what she says, have board members ever been put on a PIP? Okay, Lynn, what's a PIP?
Performance improvement plan.
So,
if there's a board member and if you just had a vote as to whether or not, for an election, as to whether or not they stay for a year term or whatever.
Gotcha.
And if you went about the election and you didn't have a discussion about the person, like if it wasn't handled properly, and we just like, oh, do you want to vote this person in? And the people that are new voted the person in, right? Because they don't know the person's background and that they've done absolutely zero for the past year. I mean, zero. So, I guess I was a no vote, and the board is my boss, right? But I would like to put this person on a PIP. Otherwise, this person will be on the board for the next year. And when Clayton was talking about, there's points in time of burnout, and sometimes it's time to go, versus that board chart. I'd love to know the source of that board chart. That was wonderful.
It's from Harvard. It's Harvard Philanthropic Nonprofit Management Executive Education course.
Okay.
So Clayton, what's your thoughts on these performance improvement plans for a board member? Are you is it toxic to say, hey, you need to buck up here, or what are you thinking?
It's dicey. It's dicey. Some people get real pissed, and I've definitely seen that. What we do is very interesting. For Ideas for Us, we have a give or get policy.
Sure.
That all of our board members have. It's set at $5,000. You either give $5,000 or you get it. That's your first parameter of being on the board. We have some people that are executive, wealthy, well-to-do, busy, but still want to contribute because it's their passion. So what do you do with somebody like that? As this person likes to say, they have a lot of nonprofit experience. Not everybody is a weed puller. Right? And they mean that psychologically, metaphoristically. It is the aspect of not everyone is going to be bending over in the burning sun, ripping up the weeds. But that doesn't mean they don't have a role to play. So sometimes the role can be opening your wallet. And that can be a big benefit because, hey, it's a tax write-off. And,
is that part of bylaws, or is that just
100%.
Yeah?
It is a bylaw, lined item
Yep.
in it. It is canonized in the organization. It is as real as it gets. You give or get. And for many people, we have younger board members as well. They don't have a means to just stroke a $5,000 check. But you know what? They are making connections and sending resources to me. And I've raised a hell of a lot more than $5,000 off of them. Add a couple zeros. So it is extraordinarily fantastic to have that kind of resource, because people think, okay, first, what do I have to do? Succeed in this policy. Once they do that and they've sent the resources or they've written the check, they then think to themselves, well, now what do I do? And that's where you can step in, and at least they fulfilled that criteria. They've made it to the safe zone. And now the person can freely contribute in a way that's helpful out of the resources that they do have to give. So we found that to be a solution to this type of problem, because in the past, it has been a big pain in the butt to cat herd lots of volunteers. But again, that chart that I showed on the board, from Harvard is so important, because you have, in the beginning, we had no staff. So we were all board members, but we were functioning as staff. Then we became staff and ballooned our board bigger to cover a much more expansive territory, right? Then we did the opposite. We shrunk our board back down to be very specific key things that we needed in order to strategically grow in a certain way. And, now we sit at a board comfortably of 9 individuals. Also, another pro tip, stick to odd numbers, just in case you have a coup or a tiff or whatever. You use the laws of arithmetic to make sure that you've got no tiebreakers needed.
Clayton, you're talking to people who live in the world of Quakerdom around us here, and it's all about consensus. So that shouldn't be a problem, right?
That's right. That's right. Yes, this career is my penance. So,
hey, but whether it's a give or get, give and get, there are a lot of variations in all that, and they're all great. I mean, this is an important thing to say, that first of all, giving is part of your board responsibilities for sure, but it also gives people respect, because now folks realize that everybody's coming at the organization with some evenness between them. It's not like, well, one person is, quote, getting away quote, with this or not. And it's a very good, these policies are very good for that respect among board members, not just for the financial viability of the organization.
The other thing you can do, I'll jump in, sorry, is that if you have an annual fundraising goal and you have competent staff and they're doing some of maybe the high-end donors, each board member could have a portion of that fundraising goal, like let's say it's $5,000, and it can be a combination. So that, and then coming in, when you get new board members, they'll all know that that the board as a whole is responsible for 20% of the fundraising that year. The other thing, I think, Clayton, back to your original, when you were telling about yourself, is youth. I think it's really, really important to have youth on your board, especially if you're a youth-based organization. And some states, like Michigan, where I've spent most of my life until now, the legislature passed a law through some lobbying through the statewide foundation organization to allow youth 16 and above to be legal voting members of nonprofit boards. And when you bring a youth on as a legal voting member of a nonprofit board, not only does that elevate their sense of what they can do, if you're trying to do community development, they're more likely to come back after they go out and have their sojourn. They're more likely to come back to your community because you cared about them when they were young and you helped them when they were young.
Of course.
So that's another 2 cents.
Of course, long-term game though, right? So you can't build structures like that and expect overnight results, right? But very key as well. I always say that, youth and young people are the secret weapon that nonprofits aren't tapping into. These people don't need to sleep. They work for no money. They are pretty much invincible. Why wouldn't you want an army of them?
And they're innovative, or they can spark innovation.
We take 80 interns every single semester from around the world. Yep. And those 80 interns, we're so good at managing interns that they're in multiple countries and come from fantastic universities all over the place. But you know what? We make sure that people who are between the ages of 18 and 25 are the ones that are handling our social media. Why? Because they will know it better than I ever even will as a 34-year-old, because I'm a millennial. It's Gen Z now that knows all of these things, right? So it is quite important to, why would I spend my time or making my board members that are older than me just because they're there to learn how to do all of this stuff? What a nightmare. And it's never going to be as effective or resonate. Find someone who is literally birthed from this world and have them create the innovative content where we can help to approve everything and steer the machine. But what a fun thing for young people to do and to take part of. It really is a wonderful thing. They get so excited and happy about it. They're able to contribute. They're contributing to an organization that aligns with their value set. And here's the other thing we do for our interns. If they're in person here in Orlando, in Central Florida, we invite them all to an intern appreciation day. We provide them with resume help, where we work on their resumes for them. We provide them with professional 4K shot headshots, so that every single one of our interns who has volunteered with Ideas for Us is now going out into the workforce with fantastic professional headshots, a fantastic resume, fantastic letters of recommendation. Guess what happens? They get a job, and now they're my insider in that company. So that is absolutely our revenue model of planting people all around the world in successful companies to feed back to Ideas for Us. So that is an extraordinarily important resource that we provide for all of our interns. Do that as well.
No, that's a great idea. Actually, that I could see can really pay off in the long term. So one more question that I have that is, so we're talking about board members giving and all. And this, I hear this particularly from younger people who are more activist types. Mm-hmm. Where they will say that having revenue requirements for board membership is discriminating against people who don't have means, who may not come from a world where this is, I mean, for any number of reasons, and that that's not something that should be part of any nonprofit's work. What do you say to that?
Well, I say that this is why we have a give or get policy, not just a give policy. And it comes down to the fact that they're absolutely right. There are plenty of people that do not have the means to donate ones and zeros to the nonprofit. And that's okay, because we know the time, talent, and treasure transaction. We know that there's so much else that can be brought to the table. I don't see anything wrong with asking someone to reach and to grow as a person by being on a team. In fact, that's what it's all about. So if someone is saying, look, I don't have any money to give, but I'm a frontline, maybe they view themselves as a victim of the demographic that this nonprofit is trying to help. I want to have a seat at the table. Great. Welcome to the advisory board. Let's see what you can do. Let's help to elevate you. Let's help to elevate your voice. Let me get a camera on you. Let me get some search engine optimized videos out there about what it is that you're facing. Let's have you speak to our mission and how we are trying to ease the issues that you're facing. And if you do well, meaning, what does that mean? Well, are you passionate? Do you put in the work and time? Are you open to coaching and learning? Do you approach this with a giving heart and the perspective of the teacher and the student? And if so, then maybe you will be a good potential board member. And in that case, we're going to ask you to get if you can't give. And we're going to push you outside of your comfort zone. And we're going to challenge you to go get that money. Because there are few things that someone can learn that are more valuable than to say, go find $5,000 somewhere. And to challenge someone to do that and to have them go through that aspects, I'll tell you, if someone comes and brings me $3,500 at the end of the year and they have tried their hardest, there is no way I will let them get kicked off.
But
so
you make an excellent point there. Get them out of their comfort zone.
100%.
And that's, I think, what so much of that is about, is that they are trapped in this. They don't want to go out for any number of reasons, whether it's, I don't know, everybody has their own reasons. But no, that's great. And I love that, using the advisory board that way.
Yep.
Clayton, this is Kevin.
Kevin.
Great presentation. Appreciate you sharing your knowledge and experience. Some great work you're doing there. Wanted to maybe shift lanes a little bit to the operations side. When you showed that graph with the revenue of was 75% of nonprofits are doing less than 100K. So that, I think we know that can speak to a couple different factors. They're just starting, they're struggling, they're flatlining, they need help. So one of the things I'd be curious about is, do you have any recommended platforms for smaller nonprofits as they're trying to ramp things up to tie everything into? Because many of them, I'm volunteering for one now, and it's mental health sector, and the founder, she's a mental health expert. She's not a operations expert. So I'm just wondering, like, in your experience, are there any, and I know there's so many platforms out there, but are there any that you could kind of narrow it down to say, hey, here's a good basic, operations, CRM or ERP to kind of try to pull everything into as you're trying to scale the nonprofit?
Excel. I mean, this is something that is much more low tech than people think. I mean, we have a CRM. We utilize Network for Good, because we are very much into the drip content marketing type of thing. But I'll tell you, email is becoming less effective every single day. I don't know anyone who likes email. So why put your money into that resource? I mean, I don't know anyone who likes email. Sure. They are thrilled when they have 0 emails, right? So you want to not put all your money into drip email campaigns for that type of thing. We utilize it in particular settings in sending coupons for people to tap into things in our revenue streams, right? So people love coupons in their email. They love 10 to 15% off coupons, but they don't like appeals for fundraising. No one reads newsletters, digital content as far as YouTube, podcasts, all of those things, way more bang for your buck. Look at what we are all doing with our morning. We're here, we're not reading a newsletter about all of this stuff, right? It makes much more sense. What I would recommend is make sure that you have the justification for a CRM system before you step into it. Have you reached a need where you are stagnated in what you're doing and now need a CRM in order to do it better? If so, by all means, get one. But remember, a CRM system is what you put into it. Its quality is only there. It's like the saying goes, what's the best CRM system? The one you use. So that is very key. Now, in the early days of Ideas for Us, we built our own CRM system just through Excel. And I know a little bit of Excel from things like biostatistics and stuff like that, to where I could fudge my way through it, but I'm by far no expert in it. So what I would recommend is, if you're near a university, if you're near a community college, if you have connections to accounting firms or CPAs or media marketers, talk to them, see if you can wrangle a volunteer or an intern or an advisory board member who knows Excel well, and have them build you a fully dynamic, interactive spreadsheet of what you need. But first, you need to figure out what you need. What are you looking for? And you'd be surprised that with a couple of keystrokes, right, on the keyboard, you can make things that toggle, drop-down menus, things that have calendar integration, things that will ping and even text you now. When, oh, I haven't heard from this donor in 6 months, let me have my Excel sheet text me and remind me of that, right? And you can build all of these things into that. So all that you need to do is find someone who has this skill set already in their job. Please don't try to make a board member learn how to do this and then make the thing. That sounds like a nightmare. You want to find someone who's already an expert, can literally cut and paste from somewhere else that they're doing this, and then adapt it to your needs. As far as CRMs go that are, big box, I've heard good things about Boomerang. We personally use Network for Good, which is very good. Salesforce also has a special nonprofit discounted thing for that kind of thing. Salesforce also gives out grants for nonprofits, and one of their first questions on their applications is, do you already use Salesforce? And then part of the aspect, if you say no, the next question that pops up is, if you win, will you convert to Salesforce? So, they've got their fish hooks down to a science, right, of how to pull in organizations and things like that. But be careful. A CRM is great, but it is a tool. It is never a solution, I've found. If you're having trouble getting more donations, communicating with donors, it's not the CRM that's going to fix it. It's your processes. And the CRM can be part of the processes, but it is not the process.
And Clayton, while you were talking, there's some really good things put up on the chat board there. And Kevin, yeah, you'll see my note there about the resources on that as well. That's good. That's great. Well, hey, Clayton, this has taken up a lot of your time, and I really do appreciate your input in so many different topics. It's been very helpful. Lynn, thank you so much for connecting Clayton into this group and to me. Any last words? I'm sorry.
It was wonderful. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I think this has been great. Any last words, Clayton? Final thoughts to leave the group?
Of course. You can learn all about Ideas for Us at www.ideasforus.org. Please check it out. Follow us on Facebook, Ideas for Us. And our main Facebook page has the blue check next to it. You can also find all of our other satellite pages for the different countries that we're in, Ideas for Uganda, Ideas for Nepal, Ideas for Orlando, and so on. Please check that out. You, of course, can reach me with any of your nonprofit needs. I have a whole team that is nonprofit battle-hardened that works with me for my clients that I have for consulting and helping with. And I'm particularly passionate about starting new organizations. So if you know anyone that is looking to start a 501c3, we need thousands of organizations like Ideas for Us and many of the others that are out there in order to solve the problems that we're facing. So this is a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed this. As I said, I'm an academic. I love teaching and sharing this stuff. This knowledge does no good trapped in my brain. So I am really happy to share it with others. And I look forward to, other chances that I'll have to share other things. So thank you so much, Matt, and thank you so much to the team.
Well, that's it for the Nonprofit Career Network for today. I hope you got a lot out of this presentation. I know I did, and so many people who were listening live said the same. Now, if you want to get a hold of us and join us for future meetings, just hang on a second and you'll see the place to register. And please make it a great nonprofit day.